Today about whether to continue raising interest rates. Recent banking turmoil, global economic concerns, and of course high inflation will play a major role in Chairman Jerome Powell's announcement this afternoon. So Sarah Ewall-Weiss has been monitoring the situation from Washington. She's joining us now. So Sarah, you know, the Federal Reserve has been very clear in its sort of master plan to bring down inflation, right? We're going to keep raising interest rates until we see inflation moving in the right direction. Inflation has softened, meaning it continues to rise, but at a slower pace. So that's not what Jerome Powell wants to see. But now enter all this banking turmoil. The predictions that we had for the Fed a month ago may be different than the predictions we're hearing now. What are some of the predictions?
Yes. So, of course, the idea was the Fed would keep hiking interest rates to combat inflation until essentially something broke. And we saw that banking turmoil, that essentially was the break. And so what we're seeing now is originally, just 2 weeks ago, Powell was talking about the need for higher rate hikes and potentially keeping the rate higher for longer. 2 weeks later, there's now the expectation among the market. Most investors believe that it'll be 0.25 percentage point hike at this announcement today. And that comes down from the 0.5 percentage point hike that had been anticipated after Powell was on the Hill just 2 weeks ago. But there isn't a lot of conviction right now in terms of if we'll even see that 0.25 percentage point hike. There are a few smaller estimates that they'll actually pause interest rate hikes for the time being because of the turmoil we're seeing in the markets. And so the Fed really does have a balancing act. It has high inflation, much too high for what the Federal Reserve wants to see with its 2% target, but it also is dealing with this banking turmoil and the challenges with the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. So there really are going to be some questions today about what they do and how they come to their decision on the hike that they expect to make, and that announcement will be this afternoon.
So, you know, when we all learned about this Silicon Valley Bank collapsing, most of us had never heard of it before, and people started to think about, oh my gosh, how bad is this going to get? Is it going to be like 2008? And everyone said, no, nothing like 2008. But then there was Signature Bank, then there's Credit Suisse, then there's the bank in California. So I want to talk to you about sort of the differences in the situations, because it sure looks bad. Is it like 2008?
So there are some very large differences between now and the crisis in 2008. Keep in mind, right now we've seen a couple of banks collapse. I don't want to speculate on what we'll see because I think there will be some turmoil moving forward in terms of the markets and the banking system. But back in 2008, over the course of several years, we saw 400 banks close. So a completely different scale here. I think one thing to keep in mind also is that the stress on the banks back in 2008 had to deal with the fact that they had subprime assets, and that is not what we're seeing in the banking system today. After the crisis in 2008, there was a number of different laws that were passed, regulations were put in place, and so we are at a different point in time in terms of how the system is regulated and how it responds to crises in the banking system. And so while there is a lot of concern and uncertainty right now in the banking system, a lot of turmoil in the markets, it's worth keeping in mind how those are different from the challenges in 2008. And so there are going to be questions moving forward about the regulations, because there are questions about when some of these regulations were rolled back in 2018, whether that played a role here. There'll be questions for lawmakers. There'll be questions for the Federal Reserve in terms of its oversight responsibilities, but this is a different scenario from what we've seen 15 years ago.
Good reminder, cooler heads will prevail. Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you.